Picture a baby, born with bones so brittle, picking him up could snap his spine. In Viking Scandinavia, that baby had one destiny: to be carried into the frozen woods and left there to die. Because the gods don't waste their breath on the broken, this baby survived. And he grew up to become the single most devastating force England had ever faced. He couldn't stand, he couldn't walk, he couldn't hold a shield, but he made every king in Britain fall to their knees and beg for mercy they would never receive. His name was Ivar. They called him the Boneless, not as a title, as a warning. While every other Viking needed a sword to kill, Ivar only needed a sentence. While his brothers bled for every victory, Ivar won wars before breakfast, and when he finally got his hands on the king who murdered his father, he invented a method of execution so horrific that historians still argue whether it was real or a nightmare someone wrote down by mistake. You think you know Vikings? You don't, because the most dangerous one who ever lived never took a single step. Stay with me, because this story is about to get very, very dark. 9th century, the frozen edge of the known world, Scandinavia. Let me set the scene so you feel it in your bones. There is no mercy here, there is no hospital, there is no second chance. You are born strong or you are born dead. That is the only law that matters. A child who cannot fight is a mouth that eats food meant for warriors. And in a land where winter kills more people than war, every mouth matters. So when a baby is born wrong, when its legs don't move, when its body bends in ways a body shouldn't bend, the father makes a choice. He wraps the child in cloth. He walks into the forest. He places it on the snow, and he walks away without looking back. That is not cruelty. That is survival. That is the Viking way. Now, imagine the Great Hall of Ragnar Lothbrok, the most feared raider in all of Scandinavia, a man whose name alone made Christian monks abandon their monasteries and run for the hills. His wife has just given birth. The hall is waiting. Warriors, shield maidens, advisors, all of them watching to see the next son of the legend. The baby is brought out, and the room goes silent. His legs are wrong, twisted, folded at angles that make grown men look away. When the midwife shifts him in her arms, there's a sound, a faint crack, like a dried twig snapping underfoot. A bone has broken just from being held. The whispers start immediately. The gods have cursed Ragnar. This child is punishment. This child must go to the forest. Tonight. Ragnar steps forward. He takes the baby from the midwife, and he looks down at this broken, fragile, impossible thing in his arms. Every man in that room expects him to walk toward the door, toward the trees, toward the snow. But Ragnar doesn't move, because he sees something no one else in that room can see. Behind the pain in that infant's eyes, behind the twisted limbs and the shattered bones, there is something burning. Not warmth, not innocence, something cold, something patient, something that is already watching, already calculating, already dangerous. Ragnar Lothbrok, the man who feared nothing on this earth, looked into his newborn son's eyes and for the first time in his life felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He turned to the room and said one word. He lives. That single word cost England more than any war, any plague, any disaster in its history, because the child Ragnar saved that night would grow up to drown the island in blood. Not with his hands, with his mind. The boy's name was Ivar, and the world was not ready for what he was about to become. While his brothers trained, Ivar watched. Picture this, a muddy field in Denmark. Bjorn Ironside swinging a battle axe, muscles rippling, every strike shaking the earth. Fitzurk sparring with wooden swords, laughing, bleeding, growing stronger with every bruise. Ubi wrestling men twice his size into the dirt. And there, on the edge of the field, sitting on the cold ground with his useless legs folded beneath him, was Ivar, silent, still, his eyes moving like a hawk tracking a mouse. He wasn't watching for entertainment, he was studying. Every time a fighter dropped his shoulder before a strike, Ivar noticed. Every time a warrior shifted his weight to the wrong foot, Ivar filed it away. Every flinch, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt that crossed a man's face before he committed to an attack. Ivar saw it all, because here's what nobody understood. Ivar wasn't training his body, he was training something far more lethal. He was training his mind to become a weapon of mass destruction. He learned to read people the way other men read the sea. He could detect fear in a man's voice before that man even knew he was afraid. He could sense ambition, jealousy, and weakness in a single conversation. He learned that every human being, no matter how strong, no matter how brave, has a breaking point. And if you find that breaking point, you don't need a sword. You don't need an army. You just need patience. His brothers built muscle. Ivar built something that muscle could never defeat. He built a mind that could dismantle kingdoms from the inside out. The other children called him boneless. They meant it as an insult, a daily reminder that he was less than them, that he was nothing. But Ivar took that name, he swallowed it whole, and he turned it into the most terrifying word in the English language. Now let me ask you something. What happens when you kill a legend? In 865, news arrived from England that shattered the Viking world. Ragnar Lothbrok, the great raider, the father of warriors, had been captured by King Aella of Northumbria. And Aella, wanting to send a message, threw Ragnar into a pit of venomous snakes. Ragnar died screaming, his flesh swelling with poison, his body convulsing while Aella watched from above and laughed. When the news reached his sons, the reaction was what you'd expect. Bjorn gripped his axe until his knuckles turned white. Fitzurk wept with rage. Ubi swore a blood oath that echoed through the halls. But Ivar? Ivar said nothing. The saga tells us he gripped a chess piece so tightly his fingernails cut into his own palm. Blood dripped from his fist onto the floor, but his face was perfectly still. No tears, no screaming, nothing. Because while his brothers drowned in emotion, Ivar was already thinking 3 moves ahead. He didn't see his father's death as a tragedy. He saw it as the most powerful political weapon he had ever been given. A dead Ragnar was worth more than a living one. A martyred father could accomplish what no amount of gold or glory ever could. It could unite the Vikings. For generations, Norse clans had torn each other apart. Danes against Norwegians, Swedes against everyone. They raided alone, fought alone, died alone. No one had ever brought them under a single banner, until Ivar. He didn't stand before them. He was carried on a shield to the center of the great hall. And from that shield, in a voice quiet but sharp as a blade, he spoke. He told them Ragnar's death was not the murder of one man. It was an insult to every Northman who ever sailed. Proof that Christian kings believed Vikings were animals to be thrown into pits and laughed at. He told them if they let this stand, they deserved to be forgotten. Then he made them a promise. Not a raid, not a season of plunder. He promised them England itself. Rival clans who had been killing each other for decades put down their grudges and picked up their weapons. The Great Heathen Army was born, the largest Viking coalition ever assembled. Danes, Norwegians, Swedes, all united under the command of a man who could not walk. Ragnar's death was not the end of the Lothbrok legacy. It was the detonation point, and Ivar was the one holding the fuse. For decades, England dealt with Vikings the same way. A few ships appear, raiders storm a monastery, grab the gold, and vanish before the army responds. Terrifying, yes, but predictable. The English learned to live with it the way a farmer lives with wolves. You lose a few sheep, you rebuild, you move on. But in the autumn of 865, something no Saxon king had ever seen before. The horizon went black. Hundreds of longships, stretching from one edge of the sea to the other, not a raiding party, an invasion fleet, the kind of armada that doesn't come to steal your gold. It comes to steal your future. Ivar the Boneless had arrived, and he had not come to raid, he had come to conquer. When the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia, the local king expected the usual: pay them off, give them supplies, wait for them to leave. Ivar played along perfectly. He smiled, he negotiated. He accepted horses and provisions in exchange for peace. But the English didn't understand. Ivar wasn't negotiating, he was resupplying, converting a naval force into mounted cavalry, turning sea raiders into the most mobile land force England had ever faced, and the English handed him the tools to do it. While his brothers wanted to attack immediately, burn, kill, satisfy their rage, Ivar said no. Not yet. He established winter camps, fortified positions, sent scouts into every corner of the island. He mapped the political fractures between Northumbria, Mercia, and Wessex, identified which kings hated each other, which alliances were fragile, which borders were undefended. He saw England for what it truly was. Not a united kingdom, a collection of jealous, paranoid, divided rulers who would rather watch their neighbor burn than send help. And Ivar smiled, because a divided enemy is already a defeated enemy. They just don't know it yet. Now, if you're starting to realize that this man wasn't just a warrior, wasn't just a leader, but something the 9th century had absolutely no framework to understand, do me a favor, hit that like button right now, because what you've seen so far, that was the setup. What comes next is where Ivar the Boneless stops playing chess and starts playing God. The year is 866. Ivar has set his sights on the most important city in northern England, Eoforwick. You know it today as York. This was no ordinary target. York sat behind ancient Roman walls, thick stone fortifications that had stood for centuries, the political and military heart of Northumbria. Every Viking commander before Ivar would have looked at those walls and prepared for a long, bloody siege. Months of starvation, thousands of dead, a coin flip between victory and disaster. Ivar looked at those walls and laughed, because Ivar didn't attack walls, he attacked minds. He waited, patiently, quietly, like a spider sitting perfectly still in the center of its web. He waited for November the 1st, All Saints' Day, the holiest celebration in the Christian calendar, the day when every nobleman, every soldier, every commander in York would be inside the churches, unarmed, unarmored, on their knees before their God, praying for protection from the very man who was about to walk through their gates. The city fell in hours, not because the walls were weak, because the men behind them were on their knees with their eyes closed. But Ivar wasn't finished. He knew the Northumbrian kings would return. They had to. Losing York meant losing everything, so he prepared his masterpiece. When the Saxon army arrived to retake the city, Ivar ordered his men to retreat, not a controlled withdrawal, a panicked, chaotic, desperate rout. Vikings stumbling over each other, dropping weapons, running for their lives. The Saxon commanders saw exactly what Ivar wanted them to see: weakness, cowardice, an easy victory. They abandoned their formations, broke ranks, poured out from behind their positions, and charged forward, hungry for glory, blind with arrogance. And that's when the trap closed. From every side, hidden Viking forces emerged in perfect formation. Shield walls locked into place like the jaws of a steel trap. The Saxons found themselves surrounded in open ground with nowhere to run. The massacre was absolute. Northumbria didn't just lose a battle that day. It ceased to exist as a military power, forever. York became Jorvik, the Viking capital of England, taken not by the axe, but by the patience and deception of a man who was carried to the battlefield on a shield. Now we come to the moment Ivar had been waiting for since the day his father died screaming in a pit of snakes. King Aella was captured, and what happened next became the darkest chapter in Viking history. A quick death would have been easy. A sword through the heart, an axe to the neck. It would have been over in seconds. Justice served, vengeance complete, but Ivar didn't want justice, he wanted a message so horrifying, so permanently scarring, that every king in England would hear it and know with absolute certainty that there was no limit to what this man would do. He chose the blood eagle. I need you to understand what this means. This was not simply an execution. This was the most deliberately cruel method of killing ever devised in the medieval world. The victim was held face down. A blade was taken to the back, cutting along both sides of the spine. The ribs were then hacked away from the vertebrae one by one and forced outward, open like the wings of an eagle. And then, while the victim was still alive, still breathing, still conscious, the lungs were pulled from the chest cavity and draped over the broken ribs. They say Aella screamed until his voice gave out, and then he kept screaming in silence. But here's what most people miss. This wasn't just revenge. This was a calculated political broadcast. Ivar performed this execution publicly in front of witnesses who he knew would carry the story to every corner of England. He was telling every Saxon king the same thing. Your God cannot protect you, your walls cannot protect you, your armies cannot protect you, and if you stand against me, this is what waits for you. The effect was immediate and devastating. Kingdoms that had been preparing to resist suddenly sent messengers offering tribute. Armies that had been gathering simply dissolved. Men deserted in the night, unwilling to face an enemy capable of such calculated horror. Ivar didn't just kill Aella, he killed England's will to fight. Let me paint you a picture that captures everything about Ivar the Boneless. A battlefield somewhere in the English Midlands. Mud and blood and chaos. Saxon shields crashing against Viking steel. Men screaming, dying, fighting for every inch of ground. And in the center of it all, raised above the carnage on a wooden shield carried by 4 of his strongest warriors, sits Ivar. Calm, still, his eyes scanning the field like a chess player studying the board. He doesn't swing a sword. He doesn't need to. He points. He gives a command. And the entire shape of the battle shifts. His brothers fought in the front lines. They were brave. They were fierce. They were everything a Viking warrior was supposed to be. And yet, sitting on that shield, Ivar won more battles than all of them combined. Because Ivar understood something that took the rest of the world another 1,000 years to figure out. Wars are not won by the strongest arm. They are won by the sharpest mind. He was the first Viking commander to weaponize logistics. While Saxon armies marched on full stomachs, Ivar's scouts had already burned their supply lines, grain silos destroyed, water sources poisoned, roads blocked. By the time the enemy arrived at the battlefield, they were already starving, exhausted, and demoralized. He mastered the art of the false treaty. He would negotiate peace, accept tribute, smile, and shake hands. And the moment his enemy relaxed, the moment they believed the danger had passed, Ivar would strike with devastating force. He broke every agreement he ever made, and after the third or fourth time, the English learned something terrible. You cannot negotiate with a man who sees your trust as a weapon to be used against you. He coordinated attacks across hundreds of miles. Today, his army would be negotiating in Mercia. Tomorrow, thanks to the horses the English themselves had provided, that same army would be burning the capital of East Anglia. He was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost with a war plan. The shield he sat on was not a sign of weakness, it was a throne. The throne of the first modern general in European history. Ivar the Boneless died in the year 873, but death, it turns out, was just another move on his board. According to the sagas, Ivar gave one final command before he died. He ordered his body to be buried in a great mound on the coast of England, facing the sea, and he made a prophecy: as long as his bones watched over the shore, no foreign invader would ever conquer the island. Think about that. A man who spent his entire life unable to stand chose to spend eternity standing guard over the land he conquered. And here's the part that will send a chill down your spine. For nearly 200 years it worked, or at least people believed it worked. No major invasion force successfully landed on English soil. Saxon kings, despite hating everything the Vikings represented, refused to disturb the burial mound. They were too afraid. The curse of the Boneless was more powerful than any army. The legend says the spell was finally broken in 1066. William the Conqueror, preparing to invade England from Normandy, learned about the guardian on the coast. He learned about the prophecy, and William, who was no fool, understood that he wasn't just fighting the living, he was fighting a ghost. So before he launched a single ship, William sent men to find the mound. They dug up the bones, they built a fire, and they burned Ivar the Boneless to ash, scattering his remains into the wind and the waves. Only then did William cross the channel. Only then did he win the Battle of Hastings. Even in death, Ivar had to be defeated before England could be taken. 2 centuries in the grave, and he was still the last line of defense. That is power. Not the power of muscle, not the power of steel, the power of a mind so brilliant that it weaponized its own corpse. So what do we take from the story of Ivar the Boneless? We take this. The world told him he was nothing. His body told him he was nothing. Every tradition, every law, every expectation of his culture told him he should have died in the snow as an infant, and he answered by conquering an entire nation from a wooden shield. He never swung a sword in battle. He never charged a shield wall. He never felt the rush of single combat. And yet, kings trembled at the sound of his name. Armies dissolved before he arrived. Cities opened their gates rather than face what he would do if they didn't. Because Ivar understood the deepest truth of warfare and of life itself. The body is temporary, strength fades, speed fails, youth disappears. But the mind, a truly dangerous mind, only gets sharper with time. He didn't walk toward glory. He crawled into history. He manipulated fate from the shadows. And he made damn sure that 1,000 years later, we would still be saying his name. Ivar the Boneless. The man who proved that the brain is the sharpest axe in the human arsenal. Some legends are born standing tall. This one was born broken on the ground, and he still conquered everything. If this story lit something inside you, if it reminded you that your limitations are not your destiny, then you already belong here. Hit subscribe, join the immortals, because next time, we're bringing you another legend the world tried to erase, one who refused to stay forgotten. Now go watch the next video. It's already waiting for you. And trust me, you're not ready for what's coming.